Recording. All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first episode where we start talking about character creation, who we are as DMs, GMs, and players over the last 50 plus years of us playing this game. And we want to slowly break down our character creation and the thought processes that go behind it, going behind, the race and the character names, breaking down the stats over the next couple episodes to really make sure that you understand the game from not just a player's angle, but also from a DM's angle. And what kind of some of the thought processes that are going in between two different styles of DMs. My name is Jason. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since I was 10 years old, but watching my Pops since I couldn't remember how old I was.
And I'm Pops. My name is Andy. And I have been DMing for, literally the last 35 plus years. And I have lots of credentials under my belt. I've had two separate campaigns that went on for in excess of 5+ years with the same group of gentlemen on a Wednesday night. Two very extensive campaigns. I have played in tournaments in D&D and have won them. I have won multiple D&D and Rollmaster and other forms of role-playing game tournaments here in Las Vegas at multiple conventions. I'm most renowned at the Gen Con convention here in Las Vegas, where overnight I DM'd a party of well over 30 individuals, where I had it broke down. It was a 9-hour session that went, extremely well. And I'm, because I've been in the community in the Dungeons and Dragons in the Las Vegas neighborhood, in the old school, I'm fairly well known, but that's long ago. I've also, I've had several articles that have had actually not necessarily published, but been added to in Dragon Magazine, which I don't know if it still exists.
It still exists.
Okay, but back in the day, I used to read and submit articles and maps and things like that and information, and at one point in time, I was featured in an article in Dragon Magazine. So, any of this information, you can go on to Google and Google my name, and you can pull up all kinds of stuff about me and the Sahara convention that I was involved in, that I won a bunch of stuff at, and so on and so forth. So I obviously at the end of the day, it's something I'm very passionate about, and he has been raised in.
So, important question though. Can you remember the first time you played Dungeons and Dragons?
Can, absolutely. I was 12 years old. I was living in Berryville, Arkansas. Dan Medford had become my best friend. His father was a state trooper in the northern Arkansas area, and so me and him got our friendship, and we played one-on-one. He was the DM and I was the player. And my very first campaign, he actually had Christianity involved in it. I was a multi-class priest warrior at the time, and because I didn't have the Christianity, I was actually going against that. And it was a whole big, that was the whole campaign was all about, my struggle against, what was it, the Christian guys that just went around killing everything? I don't remember the name.
Knights Templar?
Okay, well that's who they were, but there were the Crusades.
Okay.
I was, it was basically set in the Crusade era. So it was definitely a lot of fun for me.
Now, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons in 2nd edition. It was kind of funny because it was one of those things where I was so young, and Pops' groups, we'll say they're a little old school, and it was more pot smoking and drinking when they were playing. So you couldn't really have children on playing with that, but it was always exciting listening to their stories from the stairwell. And growing up, I fell in love with Dungeons & Dragons. And so when I was 10 years old, my Aunt Laura actually bought me the red box, the D&D red box.
And I say that when you say that you used to listen to, that's what we started with. And then we went to the first edition. We thought it was first edition. I guess it's called AD&D because we went from D&D to AD&D, which was Dungeons and Dragons to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So was that first edition to second? Is that what that is? I'm absolutely confused when it comes to editions, to be honest with you.
But I came out with when Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition came out was when I really started playing and DMing. I started as a player character, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't enjoy it. when they first came out, when it came to being a player character. I think it's because the DM that I had him, and he was a couple of years older than I was, and wasn't very creative, I guess, for the best explanation for it. And so at 11 years old, that cocky little kid was like, my dad does this all the time. I could do this better than you. Let me do it. Let me do it.
Oh, wait a minute. This sounds like Jason of 32, you. yeah.
And so I started DMing in second edition, DM throughout junior high. High school, I was one of those typical jock boys. I was an all-star football player, musician as well. I played the drums, and I was also a vocal singer. But my dark secret in high school, because back when I was still in high school, and even when you were in high school, D&D was kind of still shunned.
Well, when I was in high school, it wasn't just shunned, because back when I was in high school is when we had, you know how today we have the mass murders and stuff? Okay, well, a lot of it wasn't talked about back when I was a kid, because, back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have the media, Facebook technology that we have today. But the one thing that did get spread around through national news was these 3 groups of kids that all killed themselves playing Dungeons and Dragons. Well, to begin with, these kids weren't playing with a mental state to begin with. Much less, I can't imagine killing myself over, a game. Not a video game, but a D&D. Now, I can see we got into our characters. I mean, after 6 years, you were thoroughly into your character.
Right.
And for your character to perish, when that game ended, they were strucken because it ended abruptly.
Right.
The very first campaign lasted almost 7 years, and it ended abruptly. And so, it was like, wow. But, kill yourself over it? No. But unfortunately, the stigma, because that was national news, because it happened like in a 6-month period, 3 groups of kids all died supposedly playing D&D. That's bullshit into itself.
That stigma stuck out throughout when I was in high school. It was still uncool to play, but I joined the art club in high school, but it wasn't really art club. It started as a Magic the Gathering kind of club, but in schools they didn't want you to play, say that you were playing these games. And we went from Magic the Gathering to where I started DMing a small group in that club, and then a couple of the football players started joining. And a couple of the cheerleaders. Well, now that the cool kids are joining, everybody wanted to join. The school ended up having to actually give us credit for having a Dungeons and Dragons club, because we had over 250 plus members. We had 9 DMs in the room. We actually ended up taking over the gymnasium to play Dungeons and Dragons. But could you imagine, on a weekly event, we did ours on Thursday afternoons, because that was the one day of the week where the cheerleaders and football players didn't have practice because we had games the next day, so we were actually free to do stuff. And you had 250 kids in a gymnasium with 9 DMs trying to DM this many kids. Oh, it was exciting. And that was probably the most fun I've ever had playing. And that was early 3rd edition when that was starting to play. We were kind of crossover between 2nd and 3rd edition. No, 3.5 wasn't later. We started with 3rd edition. But we've played, between both of us, we've played every kind of system of Dungeons and Dragons, between original D&D, AD&D, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 3.5.
Well, I even took my original campaign, the one that lasted 7 years, because clearly it lasted so long. So, and we had made the transition during that period from D&D to AD&D. We unearthed Arcana and all that, and it was, the Fiendish Tomb. There was a few different books that came out, and we expounded on that. But then towards the end, I had to actually go back to the D&D, because both Spelljammer and the Immortal set were both D&D rules, not AD&D rules. And I first took them into Spelljammer, and we went through the entire Spelljammer thing. We had big ships, and I think I showed you the ship drawing that we made. It was fucking immense, and it was absolutely, me and Jim did that, and it took us probably 2 weeks. And it was on graph paper, and then went from from that into the Immortal set, and then because the Immortal set, that's when you're becoming demigods, and then going through the whole process all over again. And we actually did that. That's why the campaign lasted 7 years, is because they actually went through the process of leveling twice,
right,
and the whole 9 yards. So it was a long, very entertaining. And it was, again, the same group of guys And I would say out of 52 weeks, we made it 45 of 52 weeks in a 7-year. That's pretty consistent for a D&D group. Period. End of story. Regardless where you're at. And I mean, it was exciting. I didn't even realize you were on the freaking steps or listening because
So
yeah.
that's enough introduction about ourselves. Let's get into the meat and bones of what Dungeons and Dragons. So for you, when you're going to explain to somebody who has never played Dungeons and Dragons, never seen it, haven't watched Matthew Mercer on Critical Role, haven't seen some of the other godly tier DMs,
Understand the question.
how would you explain to a new person what Dungeons and Dragons is?
Dungeons and Dragons is a game that is played with a group of friends where you leave this world, transpose yourself into a different world, and act. You are acting as a different character in a totally different world somewhere else. And so the idea is for you to just forget the problems that you have here, forget the world that we know, delve yourself into something that you're not, and act a la aka role play something else. Everybody has always told me, oh, I'll never role play. Have you ever done any kind of acting? Have you ever, any kind of, storytelling? Have you done any kind of,
Did you play action figures when you were a little boy? Did you
That's-
play with Barbies when you were a little girl?
any of that? That is all role playing. So we've all, when we were little kids, little kids role play the most. Watch them. I mean, and think about it. When you were a little kid, what were you doing? As in playing with G.I. Joe, and in my days, it was playing with He-Man and She-Ra's and Killator and blah blah blah. I mean, in G.I. Joes, and that's what it was for me. But that's role playing. What we're doing is we're taking that 3 to 5 year old mentality and playing a game. And you're leaving now, and you're becoming something else, and you need to act it out and role play and become that person. And immerse yourself into something that you're.
That's why I always say Dungeons and Dragons at its core is an interactive storytelling game amongst a group of friends or strangers that will make you have a bond in life that you will never forget. And having the interactive part is key. It's not just rolling the dice and a numbers crunch game. Yes, you can play Dungeons and Dragons in that way. But for me, that's not what makes Dungeons and Dragons. What makes Dungeons and Dragons is having the conflict or romance or problems or conversations with my fellow players. As a DM, I thrive upon when I can sit back and I can enjoy the story that my characters are, my player characters are telling in the middle of the game. Now, when you first look into Dungeons and Dragons, the biggest issue that people look at.
Books upon books upon books.
I want you to understand, when you're new to Dungeons and Dragons,
none of that means anything.
None of this means nothing.
That
to
is
you.
for the DM, not you.
The player's handbook is nice to read through to give you a basic understanding of some of the mechanics of the game, but it's not necessarily necessary.
And I absolutely do not recommend you read through the whole player's handbook.
No.
I absolutely don't. I believe that, first of all, when you start the game, you decide what you're going to be, what race and class. If you're going to be an elven fighter, you read elven and you read fighter. And you read those two sections so you understand what you're going to be. Then from there, there's the equipment section and all that. But first understand what your race is, what your class is.
So, as we're sitting talking, talking a little bit about the character sheet. And I know when you scroll through it, it can look overwhelming. There's a lot to it. But once you understand it and you've taken a look at it, that's the first thing I do when I tell my players. Take a look at the character sheet. And literally just look at it. And just start reading it. You don't need to understand it. As a DM, it's my job to walk you through it. And to really explain things to you. And what we're going to be kind of going through over the next couple episodes is breaking it down. Really kind of dive into each little individual box, individual section, and give our opinions and maybe some of the thought processes that you should be going through as you're starting to roll your character. So, one of the things we're going to work on right now, and we're going to ignore the rest of the character sheet, we're going to ignore all the stat boxes, we're going to ignore all this inventory stuff, all this background stuff over here for now.
It's time to break it down, ladies and gentlemen.
gonna
Break
go
it down
right here.
small.
This is,
Boom.
This is where we're going to go, right there.
And the first thing that you see, the very first box that needs to be filled out is character name. Now, in my opinion, you don't have to actually come up with the character name right now. But in my opinion, you should be thinking about your character name from jump. Because your character name is one you're going to be stuck with, regardless.
I think there's kind of a two-way street when it comes to the character name. You can either come up with your name at the beginning and start building your character around that name. Or you can start building your character and then come up with a name as it goes. I like to recommend my players kind of come up with a name at the beginning because it starts bringing an identity to this individual.
I am Storm, the Thunderhammer. Well, what does that mean you're going to be? You're probably going to be some kind of warrior with a hammer because you are Storm, the Thunderhammer. You know what I'm saying? So if you come up with a name, as Jason's saying in the beginning, then it gives you an idea of what direction you're going to take your character. Because when you're thinking about overall character generation, you've got to start thinking about when you are going to take yourself, because as we talked about, what is D&D? It's taking yourself out of this realm and going into another realm. What do you envision yourself as? And I've heard you ask that question at the very beginning. What do you envision yourself as?
I like to go, you have a silhouette of a character. Behind you. You have a silhouette of a character. And you have no idea what he or she looks like. And this goes for the DMs too. When you're talking to your players and you're creating your characters, start visualizing what they're saying. Run through kind of when you're going to describe, even like one of your NPCs, you start thinking about their hair color, their skin tone, what's their body build like, what race are they, and you come up with a name, on the spot. Generally as a DM, you either have a list of random names or you try to wing it. I don't recommend always winging it. You'll forget the names down the road.
No, and as someone eloquently put earlier, Matt Mercer's tip is to always, as a DM, have a list of random names available. And and there are apps and stuff like that also give that to you. But name is very important.
Name is an identity. It's the beginning part of your identity.
Now, just as we're speaking about this, how many times have you gone with true names?
No, I never go with true names.
You've never gone with true names? Because I did true names in the Big Buttamus campaign. We did true names because Big Buttamus actually had a true name.
I leave that up to the player's interpretation. Because if they would like to have, we'll use my priest for example. I go by Terran Raid. Everybody knows me as Terran Raid, but that's not my character's name. My character has a long version of his name. I'm not going to.
So that's your true name.
Yeah, I'm not going to reveal it here on stream because I don't want my players to know much about it. But
so, and just for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, obviously I went more advanced version into the name. And, you have the name that your character has, but, in some situations, like a demon, for example, Terran, who's part fucking demon, tiefling, demons have true names, and true names can be used against you. And, in certain spells and things like that. So, in certain instances, depending on your character background, especially in my opinion, since tiefling is now a major race, because it's in the actual player's handbook, well, tiefling is part demon. I think if you're a tiefling, you should always have a true name.
Well, we'll get more into that, the tiefling names and stuff like that. But another kind of example to play with that too is, you might be a rogue. You're in the roguish world, the roguish organization. You may not have your real name out there.
Right.
You might have, my name is Slick Pockets. That's what I go by.
But your real name is Ralph.
Your real name is Ralph. I'm Charlie. From the southern farms in the far east regions of the world.
But and with that point that you're saying, sometimes your name is also determined by, race. When you look in the player's handbook where it talks about names under each race, it gives examples of names for each individual race, so you kind of have an idea of what direction to go. Now, please, What's listed in the book are examples. Don't be the cookie cutter and use one of the book names. Be more ingenious. And that's one thing that Jason always inspires for his players that go further. So you look at that list of names that are recommended for the race, and then you come up with something that's in that realm, but totally your own, totally unique, totally you, totally outside the box. D&D is about going outside normal thinking, because keep in mind, as a player character, you are a hero, and the DM needs to make your players heroes. That's why my characters always have fairly high stats, because I feel they're heroes. That's the whole reason you're playing,
Right.
is because you're a hero. And you're battling demons and dragons and shit like that because you're a hero. If you're a normal, average individual person, I'm sorry, you're not out battling demons and dragons.
So now that we've talked about the name and, the different ways that you can kind of think about how to come up with your name and, where to find examples for your name, and, do you decide to roll your name at the beginning or do you wait until the end?
And I think therein lies the biggest question about the name, is when do you want to select the name? Do you select the name number one because it's the first box to fill out on the character sheet? Or do you start developing your character and then come up with a name after that? And I think it's a two-way street, because it actually depends on the name and the individual. It can go both ways.
And that's why I said I like to have my players select a name at the beginning, and if they decide to change it at the end, they can. Because we haven't started yet. But we're basically trying to get a basic identity. So,
and with that, I want to capitalize on that just for a second. This is Dungeons and Dragons is a game that is played amongst ourselves. None of the rules are set in stone.
This is a
Zero of the rules are set in stone. All of these rules can be twisted, broken, and changed by players and DMs alike, as long as everybody agrees.
Right.
Okay? So, I just want that to be clear. None of this stuff is set in stone rules.
So don't be that guy.
Definitely don't be that guy. Oh, but it says on page 32, line 4, word 9, that bullshit, I changed that.
Your DM...
Jason has changed the rules of spells, changed them back again, then changed them back again, based on how it's actually happening in the game. And we're to use cantrips as an example. Because there was healing word is an example that has been changed back and forth based on circumstances.
During one of my campaigns, at the start of the campaign, we didn't have very many healers. So I decided to allow healing word to be a cantrip, just to make it easier for them to, to cast on a regular basis. But now that the group is filled in, we got a cleric, we've got a bard,
And healing word's actually kind of weak at this point.
Right. I decided to change it back to being a first level spell. But we'll get more into that details.
My point is the rules are meant to be adjusted and changed.
But as we're talking here about character creation, and we've talked about the name, let's move on over to the next box where it says class. Now, as a DM, when I sit with a player, I don't want to talk about class according to the book. I want to ask you as a player, when you're seeing so-and-so, seeing Ralph, what is he? Is he a quick guy? Or does he wield two weapons? Does he wield a bow? Do you see him casting grand magics? You see him being a shy, quiet individual? Is he a loud, ferocious, music-playing lover?
Is he sneaking up behind you and filtering your backpack? Is he taking the surroundings and the trees and making them work for his benefit? What does your character do? What do you envision yourself?
And so as a DM, when we start that basic premise. As a DM, if you're DMing a game, you should have a little bit better understanding about the classes. You don't have to know the classes full on, but you understand that there's paladins, there's rogues, there's rangers, druids, etc., etc., etc. We'll be going more into the classes on a later episode. But right now, what we're just talking about is just the class. What do you envision your character to be? What is his thing? What makes Ralph?
with that said, I mean, and that's the first decision that, as a player character, that you need to make is
4-star second. Name might be first.
what do you want to be? Where do you envision? Okay, because again, the idea is for you to be something that you are not. Taking yourself out of your... And honestly, this is done by millions of people on a day-to-day basis via social media. You don't have any idea who you're talking to. That's why, they have entire shows, Catfish, designated to it, because people are playing somebody else. Well, that's what D&D is you are playing somebody else. So now you're going to be playing somebody else in a medieval, usually, situation. What do you envision that being? Are you, as Jason said, the rogue, the warrior, the caster? You have to start with what do you envision you wanting to be?
I had to throw priests in there because priests don't get enough love. Clerics are broken. I recommend playing a cleric, but
clerics are broken.
I digress. But it's all about thinking about what do you envision Ralph or Sandra to be, and that as a DM, as your players starting to describe what he sees himself doing, and as a DM, you can, if they're having trouble deciding, you can do a simple encounter just to help, just a basic, just nothing encounter. Dice rolls don't really matter too much. Just go in and say, all right. You're standing there in a dark room, castle-like room, moss growing on the walls. Step around a corner, there, gnawing on an old bone, a greenish-like creature, vein-like teeth, long ears, glowing yellow eyes. A goblin stands before you. What do you do?
And ladies and gentlemen, session 0 has begun.
And that just kind of gives them their first thought process, and entice your players. Go with your first instincts. What is your first instincts? Do you reach for your dagger? Do you, begin to counter or cast a spell? Do you flex on them and decide to scream out in rage? You decide to slink into the shadows. That giving your characters options and then breaking it down for them upon that. And then as soon as you go through that scenario, you get an understanding of what they're looking at, and we don't use any D&D terms at that point. DMs use basic wordplay and just scenario acting, and it's just it will help you understand what the character wants, and then we can start basing their class off of that. Now, there are subclasses and stuff that you can talk about for the game, for different, like rogues, the different priests, but right now we're not concerned about that. We're level 0. We're trying to get to level 1, and session 0 for me is when we're building your character. Is session 0 is you're nothing, and we make you into something, which takes you to level 1.
I've even started characters. In fact, the Big Buttimus Reaper campaign was started at level 0. They were orphans in an orphanage, and they were level 0. Your campaign, you guys barely started level 1.
Right.
I mean, you guys basically dinged level 1 when you escaped in the very beginning. And so, I mean, you guys, all you were adolescents. In my campaign, you guys are all hitting your adulthood stages, and that's some of the progression and some of the role play that's been happening in my game is the progression of them going from adolescent to adulthood. So when you're making your character as DMs, and we're speaking to you DMs out there right now, dumb it down. They are babies right now. Treat their characters as their babies.
But don't treat the person as a baby.
No, their character is just it's just being born.
It's starting to get shades of color.
And it's your job to, okay, now you've outlined it, now let them color it in. And you give them a little more outline and let them color it in. But you don't want to overwhelm your players with too much, because in reality, and if you think about it, and players, I want you to think about this too, in the beginning, your character knows nothing. You don't know anything. You have 0 experience. So you really have no experience. So when you're creating your character, keep that in mind that you don't have any real life experience.
And to touch on the experience thing, guys, even if it's your first time playing Dungeons and Dragons, and yes, it can be a little scary to step out of your shell. But once you do, I promise you, it's going to be the most fun time that you can possibly have. When Ralph is no longer your character. Ralph is the second person in your head. Or Sandra. Be a little politically correct there. But, you know, I always recommend players when they're building their characters to do the opposite of who they are in real life. If you're kind of shy in real life, try to play the outgoing person. You know,
if you're a big, strong, just don't want to fight everybody, try being the pussy.
In a not so friendly term, but yes, that's, you know, but that's Dungeons and Dragons allow you to kind of explore different aspects of your life that you may not do, or highlight some of the things that you like in yourself. If you're a strong person, play that. If you're used to playing that, especially being your first time, use that as a crutch a little bit too. I mean,
and I want to caution everybody right now. Big, huge red flag caution. Min-maxing. Gamers know this term. If you don't know it, good for you. Do not try to min-max your character. You are a hero, and you will be designated as a hero in your DMs in your campaign. Don't worry about having weaknesses. Make good role-playing situations. Make fun. So don't want to be mid-max and be the best at everything and the biggest and baddest and blah, 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 blah. Have some weaknesses. Have some downfalls, because we are all
But we'll get more into that.
Humanoid.
We'll get more into that when it comes to when we start looking at the actual stat pages and break that down. What we're talking about a little bit more when it comes to min maxing and stuff like that. But right now, let's go back to the basics. Let's pull up our character sheet back up over here, and we've talked a little bit about classes. Now, basically, the class is going to kind of decide the bone structure, the skin of the character. But what makes the body? What races him? What do you see? And as a DM, don't look at the race. Don't start spitting races at them. Don't go, well, are you an elf? Are you a dwarf? Some players don't know that. So what you like to do is to talk to your players. Be like, when you see your character, are you a short guy? Are you a tall guy? Are you kind of monstrous? Are you beautiful? Slender? You know, use their character descriptions, and then as soon as your player character has given you kind of, you know, we'll say that he or she decided to go, well, I want to be kind of tall and I want to be slender, you know, and I want to be more of a woodsy kind of person. Well, that immediately runs into where you can go, okay, well, we've got a couple options you can run here. You've got your elf, your half-elves, your halflings, you know, and then open up the book.
Well, if they saw tall and slender halflings,
well, true. But you know, your elf and your half-elf, or your human, you know. Most people, and humans don't get enough credit, but we'll break down more of the races later. But humans are awesome; they get cool things.
Yeah, at some point, we are going to go through each race by race. We're going to read what it says in the book and give our interpretation of that. But for right now, what we're really wanting you to think about is the more creative aspect of Dungeons & Dragons, because it is creativity, and you must be creative. And so, as a DM, if you're dealing with an uncreative person, your job, and unfortunately it's a difficult one sometimes, is to get them thinking creativity.
Light the spark.
It's up to you as the DM to light that spark. And that's why what Jason was referring to, run an encounter by them. What do they envision themselves as? They're in a chamber. Are they ducking because it's too small? Are they small so the chamber's not, you know, it's not, being in a small chamber isn't that big of a deal? These kind of things is what you need to be thinking about as a DM, so that you can help guide this new player that is absolutely scared to death right now on making a wrong decision. Because I guarantee you right now, when you're talking to as a DM, you're talking to the player, his number one thing, he is scared to death to make the wrong decision. And I want to say right now, there is no wrong decision.
Yeah. Those of you who are new at Dungeons and Dragons, there is no such thing as a terrible race. There's no such thing as a terrible class. It's not about the numbers that these classes, these abilities that they give you. It's about how you see your character and how to be able to become attached and grow to love your character. So we're gonna, you need to think about what he or she looks like, for the personality that they might have. I touched upon it a minute ago, but you have your class, and then we have your race. What kind of personality is he going to have? That'll help define some of for your DM, some of the character decisions to help him make a guideline for some of the things that you're looking to do, and to give you the options to present in front of you. And DMs, yes, I'm asking a lot of you.
And right now, I caution everybody, DMs and players alike, especially to DMs, do not give your players too much information. They don't need to know, well, as a human, you get an extra feat. They're going to be like, what? I get, where?
Don't worry about that yet.
As an elf, you get extra dexterity. They're going to be like, I get what? Where? Don't give them too much information. Go basic, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to draw out of that player what he really wants to kind of role play. And if it's a person's first time, you really kind of want to find out what their fantasy has been. When they fantasize about them being some super whatever, what superhero do they fantasize about? So don't be afraid to ask them, well, if you were a superhero now, what would your superhero power be? So real quick, Jason, superhero power. What would give you a superhero power right now? What is it?
Regeneration.
So Jason, you get regeneration. So in the chat, think about yourselves. If I was to give you a superpower regeneration, what would it be right now? Me, I'm thinking it's going to be teleportation. Like jumper. I want to be able to teleport to something I can see. So, I mean, if you think about that, now when you ask them that question, so now think about now. In your case, you want a regeneration, so you want a character that can heal. Now let's talk about that. What kind of races and so now you've kind of found out what they fantasize about. Because keep in mind, if it's a first-time player, what do they fantasize about? Well, let's go with their fantasy.
Yeah.
Because if you get them into their fantasy right off the bat, they're going to enjoy the shit out of themselves, and then from there, it goes. But let's start with their fantasy. What do you fantasize about? Well, let's go there.
Let's go there. Let's touch
Let's
on that.
go there. Let's go to where your fantasy is, especially if it's a first-time D&D player.
And DMs, this is something that I like to preach to newer DMs. The character, the party that you're running does not have to be balanced. It doesn't have to have your basic archetypes. It doesn't have to have the fighter. It doesn't have to have the rogue. It doesn't have to have the mage. It doesn't have to have the druid. Tailor your story around what they have.
And in honesty, sometimes an imbalanced group can be a whole lot more fun to roleplay.
Because they are, we want them to be. You want your players to get into the game, and the only way to do that is to allow them to play what they want to play. Don't force anything upon them. What do your players want to play?
And that's why, and we come into, a lot of times, especially in our games, when we're rolling somebody's characters, the question will be asked, well, what is everybody else playing? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I want to know what you're going to play. We're going to put the group together, and then the DM is going to balance it from there.
I want to touch a little bit for the player characters, or a little bit of the PCs. Understand that your DM too is putting in a lot of work, and I ask DMs, you are asked to do a lot, but you thrive in that. It's fun. That's what your fun is. But players, you need to understand that they are putting in 15 times the amount of work, and you need to give them something. So as you're creating your character, challenge your brain to be creative, because the more creative you are, the more descriptive that you can be, the more the DM can play with it and help you form what you're trying to make.
At the end of the day, Dungeons & Dragons is, as Jason put it, storytelling.
An interactive story.
The key word is interactive. So it's got to be player interacting with DM, DM interacting with player. We have created homebrew classes, and once you get outside the base classes of the game and you go into homebrew classes come from where a player is creative and the DM is creative and they are interactive, and together they create this homebrew class. And those classes and that situation, albeit advanced, is exceptionally fun.
All right, so let's move along a little bit. There's a couple other sections here where you got your profession or background, depending on the character sheet. It's either profession or background. Your alignment, your challenge rating / EXP. The reason why we have both of those, I'll explain in a minute. And then, for me as a DM, especially if you're playing with people that are kind of new and that you're not as familiar with, I like for players to put their actual real name on their character sheet. So when we go, if things get shuffled around or lost, or if I need to ask for your character sheet to add stuff to it for you, I know who I'm talking to. But when you talk about your professions, as a DM, you can either do it one of two ways, and same with the players. We can either talk about professions now at the beginning. What is your character? What was he doing prior to becoming an adventurer? Was he a sailor? Was he a soldier? Was he just a simple farmhand? We'll tailor to some of the ideas that are in the books to kind of give out some of the other skill bonuses, but we'll get into that in a later episode.
And sometimes a lot of that, and I'm going to interject right now, has to do with the DM's world. A prime example is there's a major difference in your campaign and my campaign, and the fact that I had you guys in this designated area to start. Now, there were still different professions amongst that. Rogar was a rock breaker. Forbrith or Jolin, one of those guys, I don't remember which one, did outside work with the arena. I think it was Forbrith. So each one of them had different jobs within, and we had actually 4 or 5 other players that had other jobs at that point in time that are no longer in the game. But each one of them had a profession within that society. So it would, basically what Jason's saying as far as profession goes, it kind of gives you an overall view of what your character grew up in. Did your character grow up on a farm? Did your character grow up in the city? Did he grow up in the wilderness?
How did your character basically live for the last however many years, depending on the race and age?
Yeah, because a lot of times, let's say for human, for example, you'll start anywhere from 14 to 30. In my groups, in my campaigns, I always start them in my groups very young. All of my players and all of my campaigns have been very young.
But at the same time, though, I agree with him. I start my characters very young. But if a player came to me and said that they wanted to be an old guy, if he had a good story behind it, I would play with it.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Be open-minded.
It goes back to what does a player want to do.
Right.
But profession comes in huge in that situation. If you're coming to me as a player and saying, okay, well, I'm a 50-year-old man that's just now starting as a level 1, blah, blah, blah. Well, what have you been doing for the last 50 years? What's been your profession? Like in my case, I've been in fast food.
You ran.
So I did. You
played in the local eatery, the local tavern, and what's causing what's caused your character to decide to become that adventurer?
Midlife crisis.
Was a midlife crisis? Did the place get burned down?
Right.
Was it robbed? Did your boss sleep with your wife, which made you mad, and you needed to prove to your wife that you are a hero? Or was it something a little bit more folly?
I mean, there's all kinds of different directions you can go there, but that's what profession does. Is it helps you begin where you're going to, because you have to create a backstory. Not everybody comes into the game, I got this great backstory. Not everybody's Fatal.
Right.
Comes in, I got this great backstory. Here you go, adjusted for your game needs. Not everybody does that. They don't know. So what profession does is it allows the interaction between the DM and the player on creating a backstory,
a base
for
context.
The character. I worked on the farm. I was a farmer. I baled hay. I got eggs out of the chicken coop. I cleaned the pigs.
You're hard-handed. That's what I call a hard-handed person.
That was what I did. Or I was in an orphanage and it transferred from one family to another family to another family and just completely abused my entire life. Or I was a prima donna raised by extremely wealthy merchants that, so I mean, there are so many different ways, but profession starts, were you rich? Were you poor? Were you in the military? Were you in the priesthood? Were you on a monastery in a vineyard? Were you on a farm?
Were you on a boat? I'm on a boat.
Were you on a boat? So by picking your profession at this point helps you with a starting point for your overall backstory, because every character needs to have a backstory. Where have you been? I mean, your character starts at 16 years old. Well, what's happened in that 16 years to put you where you are?
And it doesn't have to be elaborate to start. I don't want to overwhelm the new players when it comes to that. It doesn't have to be fleshed out. All we're looking for is some basic information to help us later on in the character creation as well.
Again, that starts as a base so that you can flesh it out from there.
Right. It's all about trying to bring to life Frankenstein, your guy alive. And you DMs, it's up to you to draw it out of them and keep drawing it out of them. Keep pulling more information, because for more information that you can pull out of them, and DMs, you have your word tricks. You have your ways of telling story. Use that during the creation. Your story begins at creation. It doesn't start at episode 1 or session 1.
Definitely not.
But it starts at what we call session 0 right now. And so while you're creating the character, especially for a new player who's never played Dungeons and Dragons, giving them a taste of the story and how you're going to tell things will inspire them to go deeper into it. So now that we've talked a little bit about professions, there's another tagline here called alignment. Now, alignment in 5th edition's Dungeons and Dragons is not as necessary, and DMs, you may not need to use it if you choose not to. But I wanted to give it a basic some summarization of a synopsis of what alignment is. And alignment is your character's moral code. Where does he stand? Is he a general good person?
And keep in mind, and this is where the confusion comes into play, because it's your moral code amongst your society.
All right.
And that's key. Because if you're in an evil society, let's say, where killing is normal, well, just because you're killing somebody doesn't make you an evil person. That just makes you normal.
You're skipping ahead a couple steps over here. But alignment is your moral code. And what kind of... Where he falls in the thing. Are you a good person? And, you generally are helpful amongst your friends and your family. You don't really break laws. Are you a person who will kill somebody? Are you a person who doesn't... teeters back and forth a little bit, is not afraid to get his hands dirty, but rather not, or however which way you want to side it.
Will you lie or tell the truth?
We'll give a more grand detail upon what alignment breakdowns are, but I don't want you to think about as a new player and DMs as you're dealing with the new player. Let's not worry about going into the chaotic evils, the neutral goods, the law. Let's not break it down. We want to know: are they a good person or are they an evil person? We'll start with that when we begin with, and we'll fill in later on once we get more into the thing. Allow them to really think about their character. But we wanted to give that good or evil seed to plant in there, in my opinion, at this point, just so you as a player or DM can start thinking about how their character's going to mold.
And at this point, okay, you've already kind of role played a scenario with them where you, in your example, they've encountered a goblin who's gnawing on the bone. Okay, so now we're going to further this encounter just one step further. you actually had to combat the goblin. You got him to where he is now begging for mercy. You have him killed. He's begging for mercy. Do you kill him or do you not? So you can actually roleplay and kind of get their right. What are they? What is their reaction? Well, no, he's evil. He was not. I kill him right away. Well, that might toward an evil alignment. Not totally,
but if you're that's how it's true. Because if you feel that your character believes that creature was evil, then you might be doing the good part of it. So it's all depending on how the player phrases it a little bit. And
I kill that motherfucker. I smash him where he's at. Oh well, that's an evil motherfucker.
That's an evil character. But if he goes, well, I put him out of his misery because one, he's maimed. He's not going to be able to survive anymore. Well, that's more on the good side. Or I kill him because I think he is an evil person. Well, that means that person generally has a good morale, and for their society. The goblins think you're evil because you're trying to kill me, but you're not evil because you're a good person because you're trying to rid this entity.
The way that alignment is done, and I actually like the way they do it in 5.0. I actually kind of had adopted that already prior to 5.0 in my games. In the fact that alignment is really, how do you react amongst your society? And you can even dumb it down even further. How do you react amongst the party? Because alignment really determines, and I'll use your guys' party for example. You are clearly lawful evil.
My character?
Your character.
No, I'm neutral evil.
But you are lawful evil when it comes to the party. Because your rulers remain. You will remain. You are the top dog. You are shit. You don't follow my rule, I'm going to kill you. If you don't follow me, I'm going to kill you. Period. And that's where you're evil. I'm going to kill you. But if you don't follow... But yes, you are neutral evil with lawful tendencies. Because you are... You follow what I'm saying.
But I don't want to go into all the...
But I'm just...
I don't think... Right now, I think it's counterintuitive. We just want to get a baseline of what their base morale is to try to drive the character into the further stance of it.
Well, I just think alignment is just such a huge conversation. And
but it's in 5th edition, and this is old school to new school. Alignment means nothing. Alignment means nothing. Back in the day, you used to have your lawful good weapons.
Yeah, there's no way I can have a lawful good paladin in a group with a chaotic evil sorcerer.
There's going to be conflict there.
There will be conflict.
But that's up to you guys to roleplay it. But you might be an evil character, but you do a bunch of good things. It's kind of... That's why alignment is a very... What's the word I'm looking for? Controversial subject when it comes to 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Because it's not a mechanic. It's more of a description upon your character's role. And that's really all it is. And we'll go into a breakdown later on in another video where we talk about the different alignments, what they mean, and the different interpretations between the both of us on what each alignment means.
But for right now, for the basis of the brand new person in the game who really doesn't understand the actual intricacies of the advanced version of alignment, they need to know, are you good or evil?
Good or evil?
Are you good or evil?
Or neutral. We'll toss the third one in there.
Good, evil, because I'll give you that. Because when it comes down to it, everybody knows good and evil. Because that's what's been depicted in all cartoons, all movies, all books, all everything, music, everything that we have to know. Good and evil. It's been good versus evil. So, in Dungeons and Dragons, to start off with as a basic brand new character, are you good or evil? What side are you fighting for? And then from there, they can learn the intricacies of the alignments through role-playing and actual gaming experience. They don't need to know. Again, and I go, and I have to, and this is what you've been telling me, stop. Got us back up, and remember you're dealing with a fairly new player. Kiss it. Keep it simple, stupid. So when it comes to alignment...
And we're not calling the players stupid. You guys just don't know yet. And This is your first experience, and you don't need to know. That's the greatest thing about Dungeons and Dragons. If you as a brand new player,
You're on a need to know basis.
you're on need to know. Just continue asking questions. That's all, because that's all. And once you ask your questions, then we'll tell as a DM, we'll tell you what you need to do. You need to roll a skill check. Do you need to roll a stat check? We'll go more into that in later detail. But now that we've talked about that, there's one more box here, and that's challenge rating / experience. At this point, being level 0, level 1, you don't really need to do anything with this box. What is 0?
0, because you have 0 experience. When it comes to experience and the way that experience is given in Dungeons and Dragons,
Is based on DM.
exceptionally varies from DM to DM. In fact, it's so dramatic. In this room, between Tuesday game and Wednesday game, the way that experience is tallied is 100% different. I use a hash mark system. He uses a progression system. There's also an actual number system where each gold piece is worth 1. Magic item, and that's why in the books they list an experience points value for a magic item, and that's the value that you get when you discover it. Do they still do that?
No, I don't think
Okay,
so.
okay, they do that.
He's old, guys.
Okay, well, back in the day, they gave us an actual experience point value for in discovering a magic item for gold pieces. Specific, every single in the old school monster manuals, every monster was given a range of experience from like 1,000 to 2,000, depending on how you beefed it, etc., etc.
But in today's Dungeons and Dragons, it doesn't matter. At the beginning, when you're first getting an understanding, this part falls onto the DM and how he wants to level you, and he will explain it to you, and when it's that time. But right now, it's not that time.
Just like in video games, every video game you gain experience
in a different
manner. It's going to be the same way for Dungeons and Dragons, and it comes down to your DM and his preference, and whatever don't argue with it. Understand what his system is, because I guarantee you, most of my players still don't have a complete understanding of hash marks. Now, I think Forbrith is getting it because I don't know, and somebody, I think, was it Sonic that came up with this? It was Sonic. So Sonic was the first one to really get it because he was like, well, "Hey, I create this power and I can use that." But then he realized that that power
You're overwhelming. You're overwhelming. We don't need to talk about it.
Well, I'm just talking about the fact that my system is different.
Right.
Where Jason's system is the same like Matt Mercer. You use the same system Matt does.
Yeah.
In the fact that it's a progression system based on where you are at in the story.
Yeah.
So, the concept is, and what I'm trying to say is it doesn't matter. At this point, if you're a new player, write 0 because that's what you have a knowledge of. And as far as the need to know goes, you need to know 0. The DM at this point has to know what the hell he's doing. He's got to know how he's applying experience in the game. And that's what's important, But it can be done. What my point is, and I'm sorry I went too far, but my point is there are many ways to do experience and leveling progression within the game. Role play it, and you will experience more personally than your character.
Now there's a couple things, and as we're wrapping up here, that you could kind of move on to if you would like. But breaking down, are you male or female? There's usually a spot on a character sheet for that. Or, what is your skin tone color? And this is not talking about being racist or anything. It's just basically a premise of what your character looks
You're
like.
playing Barbie doll with your character.
You're playing Barbie doll with your character. What hair color? What eye color? I wouldn't worry about weight yet at this point because we haven't rolled your stats. Because if you think about it, if you have somebody who's really, really strong, they're going to be heavier. If you have somebody who's, on a weaker side, they're going to obviously be lighter.
You got somebody with a 3 constitution, they're going to be fucking a bone.
They're going to be sickly, but...
Exactly.
you know.
So.
But at the same time, though, you could have a fat character that's really weak. You could have a skinny character that's really strong. That's why weight doesn't matter at this point.
And that's why you need to be thinking about it.
Yeah.
At this point in time, you need to start the thought process of, what does my character start to look like? I mean, you've already, at this point in time, you either have come up with a name or started thinking about one. You've come up with a race and a class. You've come up with a profession. You've come up with an alignment. So you have an alignment and a profession, so you know where you've come from and where you stand in society. You have a race and a class, so you kind of know who you are and what you are. Obviously, as we go into the next stage, it's going to be, rolling your stats. But for this point in time, you right now have a basis understanding of who you are, where you come from, what your profession is. So it's a good time to think about, what is my hair color? What do I look like? How am I dressed in a normal day-to-day situation? Because I guarantee you, military guys, for example, aren't always dressed in fatigues. Cops, I'll use cops. Police officers are not always dressed in their uniform. When they're off duty, they're in
shorts and sandals.
Short sandals, blue jeans, sweats, just like any. You couldn't even. Well, sometimes you still can't tell them apart, but for the most part,
it's the mustache, guys. Let's be honest. It's the mustache.
It's the crew cut.
But I digress. And
but you gotta know what your character's like.
We gotta understanding what your character looks like, and it is the biggest premise of the first part of Dungeons and Dragons. And once we've determined what your character looks like, now it's time for you to start thinking about for yourself. How is this person's attitude? Is he or she a dick? Are they flirty, seductress? Are they witty? And some of that will play on some of the stat rules. So that's why we're not writing anything down when it comes to that part.
These are thoughts that you're having. Now you're beginning to, because at this point in time, you like I said before, you've developed all these stats and all this little bit of information on your character when it comes to race, class, profession. So now you got to start becoming that character. And now, as becoming that character, what kind of voice does he have? Is it a deep voice? Is it a high voice? Because you want to try to use some of the voice role playing if you can.
You don't have to.
You don't have, but if you can, because it makes it more fun. And you'll use voices sometimes, and sometimes you won't. You can. I mean, that's neither here nor there.
It's for fun.
But these are things you start to develop. Do I have long hair that I play with all the time? Do I have a big toe that's just what kind of outside? Do you have a tattoo on your face? Do you wear glasses? Do you have an earring?
We're gonna actually have a section upon describing your appearance on a future episode once we get past this basic stuff.
But right now, you need to be thinking
about it, and that's why we're just setting up a framework for you. But once we've done this part, we've done what based on what your class is, what your race is, and what your base looks like. At the next point where I'd like to go to, and there's a difference between DM to DM, but I like to start with the next part of stats.
Dice rolls.
That's
where I go next. So you and I
or point buy system. We'll talk about both systems on.
That's the next episode.
On the next episode.
But for this episode, for right now, let's recap real quick. We have discussed you're going to name your character. You're going to decide the race of your character. And we'll go into more details on that. You're going to decide the class of your character. And we will go into advanced details on that. But right now, you're just thinking about, what are you going to be?
Who
are you?
Ralph?
Where are you?
Lysandra?
Who is Ralph? Who's Lysandra? Where did you come from? Where did you grow up? Were you on a farm? What was your profession? What's your moral compass like?
What's your fantasy?
What is your fantasy? And we're going to start there and end there on what is your fantasy.
So, guys, again, my name is Jason.
I'm Andy.
And we are Family Banter. Check us out on Family Banter on Twitch. And come in and say hello. We play Dungeons & Dragons 3 days a week on Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights at 6 p.m., and Saturday mornings. Saturday morning campaign is still varying on time, but we're getting there. But we are always here to come and answer questions. We stream 6 days a week. So come in, check us out, ask us any questions you can possibly think of or anything like that. And we will be back on our next episode, and we're going to be talking about stats. So on that note, for that part, guys, it has been fun.
And it's been real.
It's been real fun.
Peace.